So our lesson today, the talk title is Increase My Faith. This comes from a song by Janice Stanfield, and I believe it's based upon the healing story of Jesus found in the Gospel of John. The story is that a man had a son who I'm going to assume was epileptic. They describe his behavior as being convulsing and harming himself and others. But at the time, they didn't have this diagnosis, so they said he was afflicted by an evil spirit. But anyway, this father loved his son, and he had wanted to see him helped and healed. And so he came to a lot of Jesus' followers. I imagine at this point in Jesus' ministry, it must have been difficult to actually get to the master teacher. And so they had tried having these other people pray for this boy to be released, to no avail. So finally, the father came to Jesus and said, I know that you can heal my son. And Jesus turned to his followers and he said, this particular type of affliction requires a great deal of faith. And he turns to the father and says, do you believe? And the father's reply is one of my favorite Bible verses. The father said, Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief. I believe. Help my unbelief. Do you get that? Faith is not a one-time event. You had none and now you've got it and you're finished. There's a process here. There's an evolution of growing our faith. So our work today is to increase our faith. So I've always loved that idea because I will just tell you that I am not always a man of perfect faith. Sometimes I believe, but, you know? Or is it just me? Farrelyn, Farrelyn never experiences that, I'm sure. But I can see how it's, I do believe. Help my unbelief. Increase my faith. Why do we need faith at all? Well, I want to give you a case for faith. Deepak Chopra was here a couple of weeks ago, and he described there are only three major worldviews. They're idealism, materialism, and dualism. I'm not going to recap his whole talk, but the materialism worldview it's probably the most prevalent in Western society. It's the scientific view. All that really exists is the physical universe. Our thoughts, our consciousness, it's called an epiphenomenon, an accident. That all of those quarks bumping together over billions of years has created this thing we call consciousness. But, there is no spiritual plane. There isn't. All that there is just this stuff. That's all there is. And that does include dark matter and dark energy and all the things that the scientists are telling us about, but it's all measurable in some way. Well, the faith tradition tells us that this stuff is all real, well, depending on which faith tradition. But there is a truer reality, the spiritual realm. And the faith traditions tell us that this spiritual realm is unseen, cannot be measured, cannot be quantified, cannot be scientificated. I'm going to make up words. Michael Beckwith's coming. He makes up words all the time, so I'm going to practice. Cannot be scientificated. It is the nameless. We might call it the undifferentiated allness of God. The infinite potentiality of all that ever exists or could exist. The infinite which then becomes the finite. So what does any of this have to do with faith? And why do we need faith? Well, in the rational point of view, I'll believe it when I see it. You heard that? So I'm going to gather all the information, and when I have enough information, then I'll make a step forward. And this is the way that we do it if we're completely rational beings. Although the latest research shows us that no one makes decisions solely based on logic. There is an emotional component to every decision making, but that's another talk for another time. But here's the problem. If we only use logic and our rational mind, at some point, we're going to get to a place where we can move no further because we have no more information. Have you ever been there? And at this point, what Soren Kierkegaard talked about, because he was a wonderful philosopher, he was sort of arguing the faith perspective against the rationalists of his day, like Hegel and these other guys. And what he said was that this being purely rational will lock you into a place of actually no growth. That if you're going to expand and evolve and become, there's going to be a gap. You're going to come to a place where your knowledge ends. And you kind of have a sense of where you're going to be, but how do I get there if I don't have the rational reasons? So you take a leap. And he wasn't the one that coined this phrase, but it really came from his work. You take the leap of... See? You guys are paying attention. I love that. Faith is required for spiritual evolution. To have a shift from one way of being into another way of being, it requires faith. If you're going to wait till you gathered all the data, you're never going to make that shift. You need something to take you over that gap, and this is where faith comes in. Now, it's always unseen, and that is just annoying. But it's never going to be all laid out the way you like. But here's the funny thing I found. Even scientists know that the something that exists somewhere, somewhen, came from no thing, no when, no place. Before the Big Bang, there was no time, no space, and no matter. And so even science sort of agrees with us here, that from the nothingness, something emerges. And one of my favorite scriptures, comes from the letter to the Hebrews, chapter 11. This is called the faith chapter, often called the Hall of Faith. It says this. This is verses 1 through 3. Now faith is being sure of what we hope for, and certain of that which we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. And then later in the chapter, it's just a hall of fame of all the great people from the Hebrew Bible who exhibited great faith. But verse 3 is really important. It says this: by faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's word or command, so that what is seen was made from that which is not seen. In the beginning, God. And so you can actually see that early physics does line up with this idea that from the nothing, something emerges. And here is why faith becomes so vitally important to us as individuals. It's the assurance of what we hope for. Our hopes are our own. There's something about our unique faith, our unique hopes. We get to direct the flow from the infinite into the finite. There's something about our faith that allows us to move to that next place of our own lives, our own becomingness. It's powerful. So I have one example before we move on to the next piece, that to give you an idea of what this looks like, the unknown becoming known. And this is actually not a spiritual to a material example. This is all material, but I think it really helped me understand it. For the vast history of humankind, all of our great-great-grandparents far, far away, for tens and hundreds of thousands of years, believed the world was flat. Have you been in Texas lately? Have you been out there? It is flat. Before I was moving here to Houston, a friend of mine's a geological surveyor, and somebody will probably tell me this isn't right, but he did some work here in Houston. He said the greatest elevation difference is 30 feet in all of Houston. And I believe that's the overpass on 59 over 610. I'm not sure. It's flat. And if you get out there on I-10 going to California, how many of you made that drive? Have you ever done that? Oh my Lord, is there a lot of flat Texas out there? I mean, it just goes and there is nothing. And you can see that it appears that this is a flat surface that goes on forever. And our brains evolved on the African savanna, so there's something about the way we're hardwired, we cannot comprehend any distance beyond the horizon. So all of our ancestors, I would say 99.9% of all human beings that have ever existed, could not make sense of a globe. It would be nonsensical to them. Their senses would tell them otherwise. The earth is not round, it is flat, it's evident. Go down on I-10, you'll see it. This is where rational thought, logic will take you. Our senses will tell us this. But we live in a day and age where we've had a couple hundred years of knowing otherwise, and now we've actually seen pictures, images of our beautiful blue home. And we know the earth is round. So we have an idea that has lifted us beyond our sensory perception. Now that is not really faith, but it begins to point the direction of what a dramatic shift faith will make for us. That we will have one idea that this is what our senses show us, but something else is possible. Not only possible, something else is true. And this, my friends, is why we need faith. Because we want our lives to more accurately and more perfectly reveal who we came here to be. I know I do. I know I do. So I thought I'd just spend a little bit of time talking about men and women of faith and some common qualities that they share. I love to be around people. I come from a long line, I've shared this before, but of drunks and preachers, and some got lucky and got to be both. And more on that later. But I grew up in a family steeped in faith, and I got to see this very quality of being propelled into growth and transformation by the use of faith. So I knew it as a child. Of course, it was my own personal journey, and it's not always been easy, and it's not always been apparently, how do I want to say that? The step of faith, the leap of faith does not always present itself as the right thing to do in a real clear way. That was a really poorly constructed sentence. I'm sorry for that. I think you know what I'm trying to say. But what I found of people of faith, the first quality that I was aware of is that they do not live at the level of condition. This is a world of cause and effect. The cause always occurs in the unseen realm. The condition is the effect of that cause. And to live at the level of condition is to try to comb your hair by combing the mirror. It doesn't affect change. We want to live at the level of cause, not at the level of effect. And so what I've noticed is that faith people are not convinced by the facts. They're not convinced that this is as real as reality gets. There's a sense of the possible waiting to come. And that's where they live. I was speaking with a friend this week who has started a new business. And it is a fabulous new business. And it is new. And so it's just still being formed, and sometimes the money is not rolling in as would be comfortable. And she was explaining that she had been down to do some different work down at the medical center, and that was the first time she'd been down there, and was just astounded by that place. And if you haven't been there, it's really amazing. It's like a city. I think there's nothing else like it in the country, in the world. And she was seeing all of these beautiful, large, beautiful, architecturally designed glass steel buildings that had people's names on them. And not always, but generally those are named for people who gave a whole lot of money. People who had a lot of wealth and were generous and giving of their good. And so people named buildings out of them. And this friend of mine was talking about how in her business she's excited about the possibilities, but how am I going to pay the rent? And she had this idea that maybe those people who had that kind of wealth and were giving that way, maybe they didn't have the same kind of thoughts she was having around finances. And it was an opening. And as I was watching her talk about this, she would say, she would talk about the business. And I can just see this helping women and men too. And I want to do this work. And I'd like to expand here and I'd like to travel here. But how am I going to pay the rent? And physically, I watched, there was this big, expressive person talking about the possibility, yet unseen. Yet unseen. But it was possible. She could feel it. She could sense its reality here. But how am I going to pay the rent? And her body collapsed around this tiny, limiting idea. Have you ever done that? Yeah, me too. What is it that's trying to get fired up in you that you're talking yourself out of because of the facts? Faith-filled people do not live at the level of condition. We live in the level of, in the domain of the possible, of the infinite. The second thing I was thinking about people of faith, my partner and I were talking yesterday about this statement of Jesus, greater works shall those do who come after, that Jesus said. And he was saying that, you remember there's the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000, but he said, but after Katrina, we fed 500,000. And this church played a huge part in that. That there was a city embodied the Christ Spirit and fed 500,000 in need. Do you feel that? It's expansive. Faith-based people, faith-living people are people of increase. They're people of growth. They're people of expression and evolution. They're not, this is good enough kind of people. This is what I think I hadn't really thought about that phrase from Jesus, because I thought he was talking about like Oral Roberts, like going to lay hands on you, be healed. I thought that's what he meant by the after. But no, that because we live in a different time, we're able to do greater works than Jesus could. We're part of that. And this is the impulse that is in all of life, I believe. For more. For a more true expression of who I came to be. To more accurately reveal the unique nature of God that is my life, my soul, my spirit. So I think the second quality that I see people of faith living is this idea of greater, of expressing more, of growing. And the other thing that I was really aware of that I see in people who live of great faith is that these are people, men and women of action. You know that statement? What is it again? Oh yeah. Faith without works is what? Dead. This is what the Scripture tells us. Faith without works is dead. That if you are a person of faith, you are moving, you are changing things, you are trying things, you are active. One of my favorite teachers, writers, he's been dead since 1960, but he was one of my favorites. He's a founder of New Thought, one of the founders of New Thought, named Ernest Holmes. And the 3-week series that I'm going to be beginning on Wednesday this week, called The Soul of Success, I'm going to be basing it largely on a little book. And if you ever tried to read his big book, Science of Mind, oh Lord, it's like chewing straw. But this little book is great. And it's called Creative Mind and Success. And he really distills some of these ideas which the Fillmores taught, which Emily Cady taught, which Emma Curtis Hopkins taught, that our mind and our thoughts are the mold. Our faith is what fires it, and we're the mold in which the infinite, the unseen, becomes seen. This is what New Thought is. It's not that it's a new tradition, because it's not. These principles are very ancient. The reason it's called New Thought is because we think a new thought, and we get a new result. The new thought is the new cause. We have a new effect. But anyway, back to the book. So in this book, it's really talking about success. And it's written in the 40s, and a lot of it is kind of dated in its language, but some of it I find was really almost prescient, the way that he was seeing things that I don't think anyone else in his time was seeing. He talked about retail. I think you guys would enjoy this. He talked about, this is in the 40s, he said if you go to a store and you see where everything is, and you go back a month later, and the same products on the same shelves with the same signs, what you get is a sense of depression and inactivity, and it makes you not want to shop there. Now they spend, millions of dollars on retail research to see and the best ways to get that sense of activity. And Ernest Holmes just knew that people of faith they have activity around them. There's movement. And if you go into a store where they're always trying new displays and moving the products around and getting new signs, you intuitively pick up the sense of creativity and energy. And one of the things that I learned early on in my recovery path, there are all these great sayings in the 12 steps, which They're so simple, and you go like, well, I know that. That's so simple. It's so self-evident, and yet it changes your life. I have a lot of those. And this one just kind of blew me away. Nothing changes, nothing changes. Have you ever heard that one? Nothing changes, nothing changes. When people begin a path of recovery, often there's a lot of chaos. Another one of the things we learn in recovery is that doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, is insanity. And I practiced a lot of insanity. And there was a lot of chaos in my life when I first began this path of recovery, and I didn't know where to begin. I was overwhelmed. And I had some wise people very simply just say to me, nothing changes, nothing changes. Change something. Do something different. If you've been holding on to this same little idea about who you are and it keeps giving you the same result, well, stop it! Don't do that anymore. Quit. Change something. To be a person of faith is to be someone who is unafraid of change. Not only unafraid of change, seeking it out and welcoming. Change for change's sake. Just to move it around. Ernest has this great thing in the book. He says this. If you feel that you're in a rut and you're needing to invite some of this creative change energy, he says this. Go home. Move the bed or the piano. Put the cook stove in the parlor and have your dinner on the back step. Isn't that cute? But you get what he's saying? And he says by doing so, you show the universe that you are a person of change and experimentation. And if you know anything about biological evolution, you see that the universe loves experimentation. Be a person who's willing to experiment. So I don't necessarily agree with this idea that faith without works is dead. What I actually think is that faith without works isn't faith. I think it's just words. You can affirm. We've all done it. Let's just fess up. We've all said an affirmation and go, well, that didn't work. We've all done that, probably this morning. There's a sense sometimes we know when we're lying to ourselves and we don't believe it. Well, to be a person of faith and to really live faith is to show up differently. To actually put a plug in the jug and go to a meeting. To actually stop spending on that credit card. To be a person of faith is to be different, is to begin to embody it. What's it? Farrelline reminded the thing Mary says, that inspiration without action is entertainment. And I was an entertainer for a long time. And you could leave here today feeling very inspired, but if you don't do anything, I just entertained you. Along with Boris and everybody else. We want to begin to do something different. And here's why. Some of us still have this idea that God is going to pick us up out of our life here and plop us into a new one. Oh, now I can begin to see the nods of recognition around the room. I did that for years. I was a struggling, hard-drinking, piano-playing, singing guy, and I just knew that one day someone was going to walk into that dingy little bar where I was singing and go, "You're what the world's been waiting to be," and I would be transformed magically into a new life. Well, the truth is, I have been transformed magically into new life, and it took a lot of choices and a lot of steps and a lot of years and a lot of people who poured their life into me. I posted this on Facebook a couple of years ago, and I was surprised at the pushback I got on it. I wrote this. I believe in miracles. In fact, I insist upon them. I don't believe in shortcuts. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't find a clearer and faster way to do some things. But we cannot bypass parts of the process that are integral to embodying the experience of transformation. I would say that again, but I don't know what I said. We cannot bypass parts of the process that are integral to embodying the transformation. I did say it again. You must walk it. You must take the steps of faith. Even though there are no guarantees that it's going to turn out, but we have hope Faith is the assurance of things hoped for. I'm sure that if I keep hoping and moving, something's going to happen. And then 15 years later, you're a walking miracle. 6 months later, you're a walking miracle. God cannot, say it this other way. God can only do for you what God can do through you. You must be willing to be the miracle you want to see. Now that sounds like hard work, minister. I'm not sure that I'm up for that. Well, I hope that you are. The great news is, my brothers and my sisters, you don't have to do it all by yourself. You have a community of faith ready to lift you up and support you. And more than that, you have the power of the universe itself waiting for you to say, this is where I'm going to place my faith. This is the way I'm going to direct that eternal, endless flow of divine creative energy. This is who I am, and this is what I will experience. Waiting for you. Nothing outside of you to rescue you. Something that is already in you to move through you. You know what the steps are. Right now, some of you have been doing some of those insane cycles, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. And you know what that next step for you is, and you don't want to do it. I'm there. I know. I've been there 100 times. We're all that way. But you know, take the step. The power is within you. I'd like to close with this wonderful reading. And I think Howard read this a few months ago, and so I wanted not to do it, but it wouldn't leave me alone. So I thought someone maybe has never heard this, and this is for you today, or maybe it's just for me. This comes from Richard Bach. This is the opening to Illusions, a short parable. Once there lived a village of creatures along the bottom of a great crystal river. The current of the river swept silently over them all, young and old, rich and poor, good and evil. The current going its own way, knowing only its own crystal self. Each creature in its own manner clung tightly to the twigs and the rocks of the river bottom, for clinging was their way of life, and resisting the current was what each had learned from birth. But one creature at last said, I am tired of clinging. Are you tired of anything today? Are you tired? He said, I am tired of clinging. Though I cannot see it with my eyes, I trust that this current knows where it is going. I shall let go and let it take me where it will. Clinging, I shall die of boredom. And the other creatures laughed and said, Fool, let go, and that current you worship will throw you tumbled and smashed against the rocks, and you will die quicker than boredom. But the one heeded them not. And finally, taking a breath, did let go. And at once he was tumbled and smashed by the current across the rocks. Yet in time, as the creature refused to cling again, the current lifted him free from the bottom, and he was bruised and hurt no more. And the creatures downstream, to whom he was a stranger, cried, See, a miracle. A creature like ourselves, yet he flies. See the Messiah come to save us all. And the one carried in the current said, I am no more Messiah than you. The river delights to lift us all free, if we only dare let go. Our true work is this voyage, this adventure. But they cried the more, Savior, all the while clinging to the rocks. And when they looked again, he was gone, and they were left alone, making legends of a Savior. Life is seeking to lift you free from your small